This program is supported by Northern Cement Max Plus, Supreme at Max Pro Northern Cement, Ahon, Bangon, Sulong, and SMC Global Power.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. Good evening, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and to everyone joining the broadcast, here are the headlines.
The World Health Organization said the global spread of the Omicron variant could have a major impact on the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the time to contain it is now before more patients infected by the variant are hospitalized.
China warned Western nations they would pay the price for a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics.
The city government in Cagayan de Oro on Thursday said it is in close coordination with the national government authorities and monitoring a passenger who came to Manila from South Africa and arrived in the city early this month.
Turbo pumps coming as flights begin to lift off.
And a Japanese billionaire arrived at the International Space Station, marking Russia's return to space tourism after a decade-long pause that saw the rise of competition from the United States.
First in our news, the World Health Organization said the global spread of the Omicron variant could have a major impact on the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the time to contain it is now, before more patients infected by the variant are hospitalized. WHO said governments need to reassess the national responses to COVID-19 and speed up vaccination programs to tackle the new variant. Let's listen in.
The Omicron variant has now been reported in 57 countries, and we expect that number to continue growing. Certain features of Omicron, including its global spread and large number of mutations, suggest it could have a major impact on the course of the pandemic. Exactly what that impact will be is still difficult to know. In South Africa, the number of Omicron cases is increasing quickly. However, Omicron was detected when transmission of Delta was very low, so it had little competition. It will therefore be important to monitor carefully what happens around the world to understand whether Omicron can outcompete Delta. For that reason, we call on all countries to increase surveillance, testing, and sequencing. Our existing diagnostics work, both PCR and antigen-based rapid tests. Emerging data from South Africa suggests increased risk of reinfection with Omicron, but more data are needed to draw firmer conclusions.
But we cannot emphasize more that we're telling countries not to wait, but to act and to accelerate vaccination, because the vaccines work against Delta. And even if there is reduced efficacy for Omicron, it's still better to be vaccinated than not. So those of you who are out there who may be hearing all of this information, it may sound scary, it may be confusing, but as the experts are working this out, what's important is what you do, and you keep yourself safe, and you take measures to reduce your exposure to the virus, no matter what variant is circulating where you are.
Yeah, I think the raw numbers are estimates of R0, R0, or reproductive numbers, the secondary transmission data, is all pointing to a virus that's efficiently transmitting and probably more efficiently transmitting than even the Delta variant. But that does not mean that the virus is unstoppable. What it means, the virus is more efficient at transmitting between human beings. And therefore, we have to redouble our efforts to break those chains of transmission, to protect ourselves, to protect others. It doesn't mean the virus has become invincible. It's just become better fit, better adapted to exploiting the contacts and the connections between us. And therefore, we have to double down on those efforts and use the measures at our disposal that we already have that will allow us to do that. It means we have to get fitter and faster, as the virus has got fitter and faster.
The primary attention here has to be on assuring that everybody who has not yet had a primary series of vaccination has access to that vaccine and gets vaccinated. We're in a two-track pandemic, largely, with those who are getting disease or those who are unvaccinated for any dose. So that has to be the absolute primary attention.
3 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine appear effective against the Omicron variant. A lab test indicated that. Encouraging news, even as Denmark and Britain announced new restrictions to stem surging caseloads. Take a look. In preliminary results published on Wednesday, the U.S. and German companies behind one of the world's foremost shots to combat COVID-19 said a booster generated around the same level of potent antibodies against Omicron as is seen after a second dose with the initial strain. But they warned that the Omicron variant is probably not sufficiently neutralized after 2 doses. Let's listen in.
Laboratory studies demonstrate that 3 doses of our vaccine neutralize the Omicron variant, whereas 2 doses show significantly reduced neutralization of this new variant.
Pfizer and BioNTech said that an Omicron-specific version of the anti-coronavirus vaccine currently in development by BioNTech would be available by March.
Meanwhile, Pfizer and BioNTech's news came after other preliminary results from a small study in South Africa suggested there was up to a 40-fold drop in the ability of the antibodies from the same vaccine to neutralize Omicron compared to an earlier strain. Willem Hanekom, Executive Director of the Africa Health Research Institute, which carried out the study, said it was important to be extraordinarily careful in interpreting the results because they only reflect a laboratory setting while real-world data was the true test. Take a look.
So Alex Siegel's lab within our institute did these studies, and he showed that there is definitely much less neutralization against Omicron compared to neutralization against the original strains that came out of Wuhan initially. The important thing is that these are laboratory results. We need real-world data from people. So although this may suggest that the vaccines may work less well, we need to look at effectiveness of the vaccines on a population basis. And that is what's ultimately going to guide us and whether the vaccines would still work. Very early results that we have seen suggest that the vaccines are still going to work and they still protect us against severe disease and death, which is the primary reason for which we give vaccines.
COVID-19 has officially killed more than 5.2 million people around the world since it was first declared in late 2019, although the true toll is likely to be several times higher. Scientists and health experts say vaccinations and continued social distancing remain key to defeating all variants of the virus, including Omicron.
China's drug authority has granted emergency approval for the country's first specialized treatment against COVID-19, found in clinical trials to significantly reduce hospitalizations and deaths among high-risk patients. The move comes as regulators around the world give the green light to treatments, particularly for high-risk groups, amid worries over the new Omicron variant. In an official notice published Wednesday, China's National Medical Products Administration said it has granted emergency approval for a monoclonal antibody treatment. A monoclonal antibody is a type of protein that attaches to the spike protein of the coronavirus, reducing its ability to enter the body's cells. The treatment involves a combination of two drugs administered through injections and can be used to treat certain cases that are at high risk of progressing in severity, that according to the drug authority. Trial data showed that the combination therapy could reduce the risk of hospitalizations and death in high-risk patients by around 80%.
To other news now, China warned Western nations today that they would pay the price for a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. Here's Mr. Wang Wenbin, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson. Let's listen in.
美澳英加利用奥运会平台进行政治操弄，不得人心，自我孤立，也必将为其错误行径付出代价。
Washington announced its boycott earlier in the week, saying it was prompted by widespread rights abuses by China and what it sees as a genocide against the Muslim Uyghur minority in Xinjiang. Australia, Britain, and Canada followed suit in a flurry of diplomatic bonhomie on Wednesday. All four of the boycotting Western countries have seen relations with Beijing cool dramatically in recent years. Britain has also criticized China for its crackdown in Hong Kong. It angered Beijing last year by blocking Chinese tech giant Huawei's involvement in its 5G broadband rollout after Washington raised spying concerns. Canada's relations with China, meanwhile, hit a low over the December 2018 arrest in Vancouver on a U.S. warrant of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou and Beijing's detention of two Canadian nationals in response. All three were released and repatriated in September. Canberra's ties with Beijing have also been in free fall in recent years, with China introducing a raft of punitive sanctions on Australian goods. China has been angered at Australia's willingness to legislate against overseas influence operations, its barring of Huawei from 5G contracts, and its call for an independent investigation into the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. Australia's recent move to equip its Navy with nuclear-powered submarines under a new defense pact with Britain and the U.S., widely seen as an attempt to counter Chinese influence in the Pacific region, further angered Beijing.
International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach said he is staying politically neutral on the matter, while insisting the important point was the participation of the athletes in the Olympic Games. Take a look.
We have our full focus, on the athletes. The games are about and for the athletes, and therefore you will hear the same comment from us for every political decision from any government. We have been concerned with the athletes. We welcome that they can participate, that they are supported by their national governments, and the rest is politics, and our political neutrality, the principle is applied.
Meanwhile, France, which is set to take over the European Council presidency on January 1, said it would seek a coordinated EU response to the U.S. decision. Education and Sports Minister Jean-Michel Blanquer said Thursday France will not join a diplomatic boycott by other Western countries of the upcoming Winter Olympics in Beijing. He said, quote, "Sports is a world apart that needs to be protected from political interference. If not, things can get out of control and it could end up killing all of the competitions." He also said that France would carry on condemning human rights violations in China.
The Supreme Court on Thursday said it upheld the validity of the Republic Act 11479 or the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2022, except for two provisions of the law. In a media advisory, the High Court said, aside from a portion of Section 4 and a portion of Section 25, all the other challenged provisions of RA 11479 are not unconstitutional. The Section 4 deals with excluding mass actions and similar exercise of civil and political rights from the definition of terrorism, while Section 25 is about requests by foreign agencies or bodies to designate persons as terrorists and terrorist organizations. The Supreme Court voted 12-3 to declare unconstitutional the qualifier portion of Section 4, which states, which are not intended to cause death or serious physical harm to a person, to endanger a person's life, or to create a serious risk to public safety. This qualifier to the provision Section 4 is declared as unconstitutional for being overbroad and violative of freedom of expression, according to the court. Likewise, stricken down by a vote of 9-6 was a portion of Section 25, Paragraph 2, which allows requests for designations by other jurisdictions or supranational jurisdictions may be adopted by the ATC after determination that the proposed designee meets the criteria for designation of UNSCR number 1373. Acting Presidential Spokesperson, Cabinet Secretary Carlo Nograles said Malacanang will refrain from issuing a statement until it has received a copy of the latest Supreme Court decision.
In other news now, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologized and his advisor resigned on Wednesday after a video emerged of senior aides joking about a Christmas party at Downing Street last year when social events were banned under COVID-19 rules. Prime Minister Johnson's advisor, Allegra Stratton, a former political journalist who was serving as his press secretary at the time, the footage was recorded, swiftly tendered her resignation. The footage showed her referring jokingly to a fictional party while preparing for a press conference. Again, let's listen in.
Can you stop, please? Can you stop? I'm going to make a statement. You don't. The British people have made immense sacrifices in the ongoing battle against COVID-19. I now fear that my comments in the leaked video of the 20th of December last year have become a distraction in that fight. My remarks seemed to make light of the rules that people were doing everything to obey. That was never my intention. I will regret those remarks for the rest of my days, and I offer my profound apologies to all of you at home for them. I understand the anger and frustration that people feel. To all of you who lost loved ones, who endured intolerable loneliness, and who struggled with your businesses, I am truly sorry. And this afternoon, I am offering my resignation to the Prime Minister. Thanks for your time.
The leaked video footage appears to contradict more than a week of denials by Johnson and his ministers that a party took place following newspaper reports that dozens of staff had attended an evening-long gathering on December 18 last year. The embattled leader, facing calls for his resignation from some opposition politicians during a vacuous parliamentary question session, vowed disciplinary action would be taken if the investigation found rules had been broken. Again, let's listen in.
I understand and share the anger up and down the country at seeing Number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I was also furious to see that clip. And, Mr. Speaker, I apologise unreservedly for the offence that it has caused up and down the country, and I apologise for the impression that it gives.
The Prime Minister said at the beginning of this session, but frankly it raises more questions than answers. There was no party. All guidance was followed completely. Tricia followed the rules and didn't visit.
It is clear that the Prime Minister desperately is clinging on to power. and I've got nothing left to say to a man who we simply cannot trust. So, Mr. Speaker, it is time for members in this House to act. If he doesn't resign, then he must be removed.
I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured. But I have asked the Cabinet Secretary to establish all the facts and to report back as soon as possible. And, Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that if those rules were broken, then there will be disciplinary action for all those involved.
Now, London's Metropolitan Police said in a statement Wednesday they would not be opening an investigation as the footage doesn't provide evidence of a breach of the health protection regulations, while also citing, quote, our policy not to investigate retrospective breaches. With the Omicron variant spreading fast in Britain, some conservative lawmakers said the latest scandal would make reintroducing curbs much more difficult.
However, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson later Wednesday announced new virus measures for England, including advice to work from home, the introduction of mandatory COVID passes for crowded areas, and mask wearing inside most public indoor venues. Here's Patricia Rodriguez of our EBC UK Bureau with the story.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Wednesday announced the tightening of virus restrictions in England as Omicron variant cases surge, including guidance to work from home and mandatory vaccine passports. As part of a raft of measures, the government is reintroducing advice to work at home in England from Monday. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that the government in a week's time will make it compulsory to show COVID vaccine passports in England for the first time, while the devolved administrations of Scotland and Wales have already brought in similar measures. This will be required for entry into venues where large crowds gather. The government is also making it a legal requirement to wear masks in most public indoor venues, including theaters and cinemas. Johnson said it was becoming increasingly clear that the Omicron variant is spreading much quicker than the previously dominant Delta variant, and that it can't yet be assumed that the Omicron is less severe than the previous variants. The Prime Minister stressed the importance of people taking up vaccines and the booster doses now being offered. Let's listen in.
Guidance to work from home. Employers should use the rest of the week to discuss working arrangements with their employees, but from Monday, you should work from home if you can. Go to work if you must, but work from home if you can, all right?
Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Patricia Rodriguez. We live in interesting times.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Cement.
Ahon, bangon, sulong!
Pinalaki ng Northern Cement ang kapasidad ng kanilang planta para steady ang supply ng sementong tigasin. Northern Cement Max Plus, Supreme at Max Pro.
Ahon, bangon, sulong!
Welcome back. The city government of Cagayan de Oro City today said it is in close coordination with the national government authorities in monitoring a passenger who came to Manila from South Africa and arrived in the city earlier this month. Dr. Teodoro Yu Jr., city health officer, said Thursday during an online briefer the passenger was one of the 8 travelers who came from South Africa, where the Omicron variant of COVID-19 was first reported. He also said, take a look, he also said that the passenger arrived in Manila on November 20 and tested positive the next day, November 21. Then when the passenger was declared clinically recovered on December 1, he traveled to the city on the same day. The passenger was tested in the city on December 6 and turned out negative the next day. Dr. Yu said it was here in Cagayan de Oro City where the passenger underwent repeat swab testing after arriving at the city from Manila, and he said they are coordinating with the Philippine Genome Center for any developments on the case. Mayor Oscar Moreno said the passenger was reported in the national news media as being unaccounted for after arriving in Manila from South Africa. What happened, he said, was last Sunday evening, December 5, Dr. Yu received a call from the Department of Health, the regional office, DOH-10, advising him of this development. And in less than 4 hours, the CHO contacted this person and had him tested the following day. Dr. Yu said he was told by both the DOH-10 and City Hall's Health Emergency Management team about the arrival from Manila. And upon confirmation of his address, they immediately checked his household for any symptoms and secured his plane ticket and boarding pass and traced his whereabouts through the Higala or online application.
The U.S. Senate on Wednesday voted to block President Joe Biden's vaccine or test mandate for large private employers in a symbolic win for conservatives that will have little tangible effect. The measure passed 50-48 with the support of all 50 Republicans in the upper chamber and 2 centrist Democrats, but is not expected to fare well in the House of Representatives, where it may only have support from the right. Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer likened the Republicans to flat earth theorists and accused those who have sought out vaccine shots for themselves of hypocrisy. Let's listen in.
Important moment for national leaders to double and triple down on encouraging all eligible Americans to get vaccinated and boosted as soon as possible. But as soon as today, our Republican friends are going to come to the floor to push an anti-science, anti-vaccine proposal to overturn the president's vaccine requirements for businesses with more than 100 employees. My friends, America, we are in the middle of a public health crisis. Everyone sees the damage it causes to themselves, their friends, their families, their communities. And the way to solve this is be driven by science. We've had hundreds of years of scientific advancement. It's helped us live longer and live healthier.
Under Biden's plan, all companies with more than 100 workers will have to require their employees to be immunized or undergo weekly testing from January 4. The Senate pushback was led by Indiana's Mike Braun, who told reporters that threatening Americans' jobs if they refuse on both counts is the heavy hand of government. Wyoming's John Barrasso, the chairman of the Senate Republicans, accused Biden, who is not a doctor, of medical malpractice. After the vote, Joe Manchin, one of the 2 Democrats who sided with Republicans, said while he supports a vaccine mandate for federal employees and the military, it was not the place of the federal government to dictate to private businesses.
In other news, jailed Hong Kong media mogul Jimmy Lai was among 3 democracy campaigners convicted today for taking part in a banned Tiananmen vigil as the prosecution of multiple activists came to a conclusion. Lai, the 74-year-old owner of the now shuttered pro-democracy Apple Daily newspaper, was found guilty of unlawful assembly charges alongside former journalist Gwyneth Ho and prominent rights lawyer Chow Hang-tung. Authorities had charged more than 24 pro-democracy politicians and activists over a vigil last year, which commemorated the victims of Beijing's deadly Tiananmen crackdown in 1989, despite a police ban. The trio were the only ones to contest their charges in court, meaning they were the last to receive their verdict. They also argued they went to light candles in a personal capacity and had not incited others to join an outlawed rally. Lai, Chow, and Ho are among dozens of activists already behind bars, facing separate prosecutions under a strict national security law that Beijing imposed on Hong Kong last year.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will head to Southeast Asia next week on a tour designed to show the region's importance for the U.S. strategy of confronting China and to further address the worsening crisis in military-ruled Myanmar. Blinken will start off his round-the-world journey with a meeting with his G7 colleagues Friday through Sunday in Liverpool, England. His spokesman, Ned Price, said in a statement yesterday. Blinken will then head to Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand to stress the top priority of U.S. foreign policy, which is to challenge an ever more assertive China. The United States accuses China of regional intimidation and pressure, especially in the South China Sea. The response or the Secretary's meeting will focus on strengthening the regional security infrastructure in response to PRC bullying in the South China Sea. Daniel Crittenbrink, Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, told reporters using the acronym for the People's Republic of China. Crittenbrink added that Blinken will discuss unilateral PRC actions in the Mekong River, as well as freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight. The Chinese government has come under criticism for building dams upstream on the Mekong River, which affects water levels and fisheries in neighboring countries. In Jakarta, Blinken will give a speech on the significance of the Indo-Pacific region, while in Kuala Lumpur, he will address the need for the region to remain free and open, according to Price. In each country, the secretary will reiterate to his counterparts the importance of holding the Burmese military regime to account for its crimes and seeking to restore Burma's path to democracy, Crittenbrink said, using a former name for Myanmar. The United States has repeatedly denounced the February 1 military coup that ousted the civilian government in Myanmar and the jailing of civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Blinken will stop in Hawaii December 17 on his way home.
In other news, the death toll from the eruption of Indonesia's Mount Semeru has risen to 39, according to authorities, as rescuers scramble to retrieve more bodies under the threat of further volcanic activity. The highest mountain on the island of Java thundered to life on Saturday, ejecting volcanic ash into the sky and raining hot mud on villages as thousands of panicked people fled their homes. Another injured victim died in hospital on Tuesday, it added, pushing the death toll up from 34 to 39. A spokesperson for the agency said 12 people were still missing. The disaster blanketed villages in gray ash and forced more than 4,000 people to flee to temporary shelters. Evacuees had been complaining of coughing, chest infections, and diarrhea, according to medics at shelters in Lumajang district. Others expressed relief at making it out alive and being reunited safely with loved ones. Rescuers have been braving dangerous conditions in their search for bodies buried under the mud and rubble of collapsed homes. The head of the country's volcanology agency said there was also still the potential for secondary eruptions and warned people told to stay away. Indonesia has more than 130 active volcanoes and sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, where the meeting of continental plates causes frequent volcanic and seismic activity.
In other news, Bangladesh sentenced 20 university students to death on Wednesday for the 2019 murder of a young man who criticized the government on his social media. The battered body of Abrar Fahad, 21 years old, was found in his dormitory hours after he wrote a Facebook post slamming Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina for signing a water-sharing deal with India. He was beaten with a cricket bat and other blunt objects for 6 hours by 25 fellow students who were members of the ruling Awami League student wing, the Bangladesh Chhatra League. The remaining 5 perpetrators were handed life terms. All those given death sentences were between 20 and 22 years old at the time of the murder and attended the elite Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology alongside the victim Fahad. 3 of the defendants are still at large.
In business news, 2 major Chinese property firms have defaulted on $1.6 billion worth of bonds to overseas creditors, Fitch Ratings agency said today, as contagion spreads within the country's debt-ridden real estate sector. The Chinese government sparked the crisis within the property industry when it launched a drive last year to curb excessive debt among real estate firms as well as rampant consumer speculation. Companies that had accrued huge debt to expand suddenly found the taps turned off and began struggling to complete projects, pay contractors, and meet both domestic and foreign repayments. Real estate behemoth Evergrande has been the highest profile firm embroiled in this crisis, struggling for months to raise capital to pay off $300 billion in debt. And on Thursday, Fitch confirmed the company had defaulted for the first time on more than $1.2 billion worth of bond debt as it downgraded the firm's status to a restricted default rating. Fitch also confirmed Kaisa, a smaller property company, but one of China's most indebted, had also defaulted on $400 million of bonds. Evergrande's troubles first surfaced in the summer when it made clear how heavily leveraged the firm had begun. The eye-watering figures shook China's credit markets because the sheer size of the company and the potential fallout should it collapse.
The European Union took aim at the business model of gig economy companies like Uber and Deliveroo on Thursday, with plans that could force them to reclassify their workers as fully fledged employees. The plan is an effort to sort out once and for all the employment status of millions of drivers and delivery people that the major platforms insist are self-employed. Let's listen in.
In short, digital platforms have massive potential. They offer working flexibility, they create jobs, bring innovation, and cater for what is clearly a strong consumer demand. However, people are at the heart of this business model. They deserve the same protection and conditions as any other worker in any EU country, including access to collective bargaining and representation. That is what we plan to provide and guarantee. Of 28 million platform workers I mentioned, there may be up to 5.5 million whose contracts describe them as self-employed. But in reality, they are regularly checked and supervised. This effectively makes them employed workers. They should have the labor and social rights that correspond to this status, such as working time and health protection, minimum wage, unemployment, sickness, and old age benefits.
Decisions can vary markedly, with Belgium on Wednesday denying a small group of delivery workers the designation of employees, while Uber lost in court in non-EU Britain over its service in London. The potential for an EU-wide redesignation of platform workers sent the share prices of Deliveroo and other platforms plummeting in recent days over fears that their business model was under threat. The tech companies lobbied hard against any EU-wide reclassification, citing a survey by Copenhagen Economics that 250,000 people would be forced out of delivery work if the decision applied for all. They also worry that the criteria will be too vague, with different interpretations bringing on even more court cases instead of legal certainty.
Instagram's boss aimed to appease fuming U.S. lawmakers with a rosy view of the photo-sharing app's impact on teens, but they rejected his self-regulation proposal and signaled a rekindled push to clamp down on big tech. Adam Mosseri argued that the service could help struggling young people, despite documents leaked by a company insider raising worries of harms. Let's listen in.
I also know that sometimes young people can come to Instagram dealing with difficult things in their lives. I believe that Instagram can help in those critical moments. It's one of the things that our research has shown, and to me, this is the most important work that we can do. I also know that sometimes young people can come to Instagram dealing with difficult things in their lives. I believe that Instagram can help in those critical moments. It's one of the things that our research has shown, and to me, this is the most important work that we can do.
On the eve of Wednesday's hearing, Instagram announced new protections for young users, like suggesting a break if they've been spending a lot of time on the platform. The timing of the announcement drew a wary reception from lawmakers who questioned whether it was an effort at distraction ahead of the hearing. Stephen Balcom, founder and CEO of advocacy group Family Online Safety Institute, said that the pre-hearing announcements are a Washington tradition, but noted that they won't make the app's problems go away.
The Hong Kong government made its check-in app mandatory for most adults in bars and restaurants on Thursday, the latest expansion of coronavirus tracing tech at a time of heightened privacy concerns in the city. The international finance hub has kept infections at bay thanks mostly to closed borders, some of the world's strictest quarantine rules, and ongoing social distancing rules. No local infections have been recorded in months, but the city is further ramping up virus measures, aligning with China's zero-COVID strategy as it seeks quarantine-free travel with the mainland. From Thursday, all adults under 65 must use the city government's COVID app, scanning QR codes to log their presence at 18 types of premises, including eateries, cinemas, gyms, and karaoke venues. The logs can be used to trace infections if there is an outbreak. Children and the elderly were exempted at the last minute after a public backlash against the proposal to make the app mandatory for all. The Leave Home Safe app has been in use since November 2020, but until Thursday, it was not mandatory and people could still fill out paper slips when entering venues.
And Tiger Woods said Wednesday he will make his return to competitive golf at next week's PNC Championship in Florida. The former world number one, who has not played since suffering career-threatening leg injuries in a car crash 10 months ago, will play in the December 16 to 19 tournament alongside his son, Charlie. Although it's been a long and challenging year, I am very excited to close it out by competing in the PNC Championship with my son, Charlie, Woods announced on Twitter. I'm playing as a dad and couldn't be more excited and proud, added Woods, who suffered compound fractures in his right leg after the car he was driving in a Los Angeles suburb in February veered off the road and flipped several times. The PNC Championship, part of the PGA Tour Champion Series, which is being stayed at the Ritz-Carlton Golf Club in Orlando, sees 20 major champions team up with a relative of their choice. Woods played in the 2020 event alongside son Charlie, 12, a tournament won by Justin Thomas and his father, Mike.
Finally, in our news, the International Space Station has received its first self-funded tourist visit in more than 10 years. Take a look.
Turbo pumps come into flight, and liftoff. Liftoff of the Soyuz MS RS-20 with 2 Japanese space Russian cosmonaut now beginning their journey to the International Space Station.
Online
First in,
fashion
Soyuz
tycoon
Commander
Yusaku
Alexander
Maezawa
Mazurkin.
and his assistant Yozo Hirano blasted off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan earlier on Wednesday. A Roscosmos live feed showed the hatch of
Next is spaceflight participant Yusaku
Soyuz
Maezawa.
MS-20 capsule open at 16:11 GMT, showing Russian cosmonaut Alexander Mazurkin entering the ISS, followed by Maezawa and Hirano. Their journey aboard the 3-person Soyuz spacecraft piloted by Mazurkin took just over 6 hours, capping a banner year that many have seen as a turning point for private space travel. As the hatches opened, the trio floated into the orbital station where they were greeted by Russian cosmonauts Anton Shkrablerov and Peter Dubrov. The trio will spend 12 days on the space station, where the Japanese tourists will document their daily life aboard the ISS for Maezawa's popular YouTube channel. The 46-year-old billionaire has set out 100 tasks to complete on board, including hosting a badminton tournament. Maezawa also plans to take 8 people with him on a 2023 mission around the moon operated by Musk's SpaceX. He and his assistant are the first private Japanese citizens to visit space since journalist Toyohiro Akiyama traveled to the MIR station in 1990. Russia has a history of shepherding self-funded tourists to space. In partnership with US-based company Space Adventures, Roscosmos previously took 7 tourists to the ISS since 2001, one of them twice. The last was Canada's Cirque du Soleil co-founder Guy Laliberte in 2009, who was dubbed the first clown in space. In October, Russia launched its first untrained cosmonauts into space since Laliberte's trip, now delivering a Russian actress and director to the ISS, where they filmed scenes for the first movie in orbit. While the cost of tickets to space for tourists has not been disclosed, Space Adventures has indicated that they are in the range of $50 to $60 million. Roscosmos plans to continue growing its space tourism business, already commissioning 2 Soyuz rockets for such trips.
First in, Soyuz Commander Alexander Mazurkin.
We need a space watch.
I know. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm CJ Hero. The news continues tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
This program is supported by Northern Cement Max Plus, Supreme at Max Pro Northern Cement, Ahon, Bangon, Sulong, and SMC Global Power.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng